Okay, great. Good morning. We had a really productive and interesting first day here at our first Green Business Forum. And today we will have a full lineup full of interesting, more targeted discussions on different aspects of green business. For our first session today, it's our third plenary where we will be covering green technology and innovation. So I'd like to invite to the stage our chair, Mr. Matthias Gelber, co-founder of Maleki, and he will be chairing our session for today. Matthias?
Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga. Hopefully I got my Tagalog right. Good, thumbs up, excellent. I hope we are going to pick up where we kind of ended yesterday with a very inspiring day with loads of learning. I woke up this morning and tried to implement my own green business strategy by not using any extra shampoo, very little water, no water heater switched on when I took the shower to minimize my own environmental impact. And as you can see here, my bag is bought from a green business. If you remember what Daniela shared yesterday morning, the core green business definition, there is no question mark whether we consider it green business or not, is those companies that produce environmental products and services. This clearly is. But when I bought this a couple of months ago, this is made from waste material from Tacloban, Typhoon Haiyan. The support goods were delivered in these plastic wrappings. And local people have been employed to make this. But when I wanted to buy this bag from the gentleman who was manufacturing it, he said, "Oh, I'm not sure whether I can sell it to you because I've only got very few bags." Why? I asked him. Yeah, there's not so much demand for it. That's why we don't have a continuous production. We, the consumers, and our demand, our purchasing power has an impact on whether some of the niche green businesses and technologies become mainstream. When I started my first green business 15 years ago in the UK, I was riding the wave of ISO 14001. Certified environmental management systems will be covered this afternoon, the whole subject of certification and labels. That business moved very fast to mainstream because so many companies were asking for training, consulting, and certification services. It was perfect timing. The second business I started was to replace cement with secondary waste materials. 9 years ago in Germany, we expected we need €500,000 to kick off the business. We ended up requiring €3 million. It took us 6 years to make a profit instead of 2 years to make a profit as we expected. Technology-based business in an industry where change is very slow. The question we got, your concrete, your building material, your flooring, show us another construction site where this has been used for 5 years and then we will buy. But we don't want to be the ones that use it for the first time if it's a new technology. So those are some of the challenges and opportunities that we are facing. And this panel hopefully will give us case studies, answers, experiences that will help us better to move from niche to mainstream, to see an economy where more green businesses and green technologies are successful for the sake of a green economy, a sustainable economy, an economy that creates loads of green jobs. I think Eric Solheim mentioned it yesterday as well. I remember the days where we had acid rain in Germany. I was campaigning as a teenager against acid rain. The river Rhine was so polluted that fish were dying. But with the right policy framework, with the right technology, with the right beginning of the pipe technology, we can create economic development, jobs, and great opportunities. So the first speaker that we will have is Alka from Tata. Alka Upadhyay. She's the Assistant Vice President of Tata Sustainability Group. I first came across Tata 5 years ago. I was at a hotel in Langkawi. The GM of the hotel asked me, what can we do to go green? We discussed a couple of things. He told me, I already told the cook to not buy any lamb chops from New Zealand anymore because they are destroying the carbon footprint of my hotel operation. I was like, wow, this guy is doing carbon footprinting. I asked him, why are you doing carbon footprinting as a GM of this hotel? Because I was one of the leaders, senior managers within the Tata Group that was selected to go through corporate training on carbon footprinting. Wow. There's something going on in the culture there that's trying to drive green innovation within the business. So Alka, we are really looking forward to hear your presentation. May I invite you to join us on the stage and share with us what Tata as a large company is doing to innovate with greening internally.
Thank you, Matthias.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Okay. What I'm going to do is share what Tatas have done in last 7-8 years in sustainability space. And I hope there are certain takeaways for you over here. But before I go to sustainability, let me talk about what is Tata Group, just to give you an impression how diverse we are. It's like country within country. We are $103 billion US group. We are spread in 7 different sectors. In 6 continents, there are 100 operating companies. We are very federal in structure. Each operating company has its own management as well as board, working independently from the group center where I belong to. And we also own, many people don't know, we own the iconic brands like Jaguar, Land Rover, Tetley, TCS, etc., etc. And we have only 600,000 Tata employees pan-world. So this slide is just to show you the complexity, the diversity of Tata Group. Against this backdrop, what we wanted to achieve is what is called Tata Sustainability Stance. And what we have done is come up with a sustainability policy, which is sort of giving a direction to Tata operating companies. Remember, we are federal in structure. We only softly mandate for Tata companies to adopt these policies. So what is the policy talking about? We very categorically said we would like to be the global sustainability leader in the sector in which we operate. This is our aspiration. We would like to be known for our global sustainability footprint. As an FYI, we are already recognized as Asian leader in sustainability space. Thank you. But I would spend some time talking about if you have to achieve your aspiration, you have to create ecosystem. And this is what we have attempted to do and what Matthias mentioned as culture building. So the how part is we created a special governance structure to drive this theme within Tata Group. Around this, we also had what is called common minimum areas, common minimum agenda for Tata companies to adopt. And we spend a lot of time in creating culture and capacity building within Tata. And we also created system for measurement and review to see whether we're on track or not. I'll touch upon each item. So what is the sustainability governance structure at the group level? We have 2-tier structure. We have called something called Tata Global Sustainability Council, which is made up of CEOs of movers and shakers of Tatas. All big Tata company CEOs are member of this governance, which is the apex governance. They are the one who are responsible for providing the strategic direction in this space. And below this, there is Sustainability Working Council, which is made up of chief sustainability officers of Tata companies. These sustainability officers are our extended arms to implement those areas which we have identified as common minimum program. As I mentioned, there are not necessarily everything we can do from the group center, but we want our Tata companies to definitely do something around these themes. So first is climate change. Under climate change, it's mitigation, adaptation, life cycle assessment, et cetera, et cetera. We also have water stewardship. It's not looking at water as a traditional water consumption, but from the point of view of sustainability of watershed, where we exist, where our asset exists. We also are doing a lot around plant and building envelope energy efficiency. In a way, it's partly captured in our combating climate change journey. We are working in resource productivity and circularity, and we just started what is called natural and social capital valuation of some companies. My group is also responsible for social development and disaster response, group CSR level programs, volunteering. As Matthias, you mentioned, we want each and every Tata employees to feel and contribute towards development of societal programs. So we volunteer during our office hour in form of in-kind contribution. And we also are looking into supply chain sustainability. Given the constraint of time, I won't spend time much on social, but definitely on environmental sustainability areas. The third, as I said, we believe that if we have to make an impact, we have to create that culture. And what we have done is, by design, made our C-suite people, the creamy layer, the CSOs, CMOs, CFOs, COOs, and CEOs of Tata companies go through a proper 3-day sustainability leadership program with the help of Cambridge University. It's by design, so we want our creamy layer to be aware of what we are talking about. Parallelly, we have also made our middle management understand this subject. And what we are seeing on this slide is our effort in creating critical mass or champions, as he said, climate change champions, water champions, natural capital valuation champions, to act as our backbone, to act as our support in driving this subject. Last, I would say, in terms of system and processes, we have by design created measurement system. We have something called Tata Business Excellence Model, which is a check of how the Tata companies are doing on their business excellence based on Malcolm Baldrige principles, which actually includes now sustainability aspects. So when the company is going through an annual assessment on business excellence, they are also going through assessment of sustainability aspects, where they are in terms of processes and performance. We also have standalone sustainability assessment framework, and we also have something called group level KPIs, which is being reviewed by the TGSC with the Apex Council I talked about earlier. Just to give a sense of what has been the deliverables so far, I'll touch upon only 3 elements: the climate change, natural capital, and circularity. Our Tata climate change journey started in 2008, almost 8 years back. Once our AR4 was published, we believe that the science is saying human beings created, and we believe that in ingenuity of Indians, Tatas, to do something about it. So what we did was come up with our climate change policy. And it very clearly says we will play a leadership role in combating climate change by being the benchmark on the specific climate carbon emission intensity in our sector. Today, after 8 years, many Tata companies are national and global benchmark on specific carbon intensity. We also said if we do sufficiently well, we showcase that we have done sufficiently well, policymakers will listen to us. And hence, we are in a position to do responsible advocacy in this space. And we also incorporated various lenses, carbon lenses, in our process and systems. Very quickly, this exercise, when we started, we did 3 things. We did our baselining, where we are in terms of our carbon footprint. We also forecasted where we will be in 10 years hence, by 2020, what will be our footprint if we don't do anything, business as usual scenario. And then we developed our low carbon strategy, just to make our footprint come down. And this low carbon strategy actually was based on proper numbers. We were talking to business managers, hence we had to have a business numbers with us. So we created what is called cost abatement curve for each and every Tata company. There are 50 companies which put together are responsible for 95% of Tata emissions. We created cost abatement curve for each and every one of them. And what we realized, the energy efficiency was the easiest one. This was the low-hanging fruits. And they were responsible for, to the extent of 15 to 20% of carbon emission reductions. That didn't ask for it. That was just do it, and it happened. The next bucket was use of renewable energy. Interestingly, this was a period, 2010-11 onwards, when renewable energy saw a drop in its, or rather renewables saw a drop in its cost. There are companies like Tata Power, which announced actually they will generate to the extent of 35 to 40% of their power generation through non-fossil. This is their aspiration, very strategic in nature, and that's the reason I picked up Tata Power. There is Tata Motors, which committed to RE100, saying their electricity requirement will come 100% through renewable. So these are the type of aspiration and companies are working towards it. So renewable is very much now making commercial sense. For power, it is as good as coal-based power generation. The feed-in tariff is nearly reaching there. We also spend a lot on technology upgradation, using a lot of clean technologies. I'll give an example of Tata Power again. This was the one company which put up 4 gigawatts of ultra mega power plant. ADB is one of the funders along with IFC. Jaguar Land Rover, you have to see that if we don't do anything, we won't be relevant tomorrow. These are proper, there are regulations unfolding. There are stringent requirements in terms of emissions which are coming in various geographies. Might as well be ready for embracing those stringent. So Jaguar Land Rover, tailpipe emission, Tata Motors, tailpipe emission, they want to achieve those numbers much before they are sort of, react to the regulation which comes. Sure. Then we are, by design, putting up a lot of time in digitalization. We are spending a lot of effort in what is called smart factory and smart fleet. Doing a lot of green products. Voltas, it's an AC. It's already all come up with all-weather products. We are doing a lot on demand-side management. You all are consumers, and we are asking for certain things. So we believe we are in a position to do demand-side management. We are also into green financing. Tata Clean Tech Capital is the one which is giving funds for putting up clean technologies. We have Tata Motors Finance, which is giving a different line of credit for picking up CNG-based transport. And we are also in disclosure. Yesterday, in one of the plenary, there was a talk that there is an attempt to put up climate-related financial disclosure as a part of fiduciary. And Tata Steel Group CFO is part of this task force. We also attempted to do natural capital valuation. We are actually part of Natural Capital Coalition. We shaped up the framework. We piloted the framework. We are actually right now doing in 5 companies this power, steel, chemicals, motors. Initial results shows that greenhouse gas is the one which is making tremendous impact. And consciously, unconsciously, we had picked up that subject in any case. We are working on circular economy philosophy. There are 3 examples which are listed, but for the paucity of time, I'll just touch upon one. Real Car. This is the recycling aluminium, real standing for acronym of recycling aluminium, which is being used by Jaguar Land Rover to the extent of 50% today in their car manufacturing, and their ambition of taking it up to 75% by 2020. Tata Motors ProLife is the one which is working in area of refurbishment, because we believe tomorrow extended producer responsibility will come for all the electronics and consumer products, and they are preparing for that. In conclusion, if we have to make mainstream this subject of sustainability in green business, you need to have clarity on your aspiration. You have to have a blueprint how to achieve those aspirations. You have to invest. There's no shortcut. Culture changing is slow. Please, please be patient and spend some time creating those, communication protocol. Create measurement system to manage your footprint, and continuously be in lookout for the new trends in this space. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Alka. Please take a seat over here for a very inspiring presentation and a great example how an established large corporate in the ASEAN region in Asia actually manages to really make it happen inside of the organization. And sometimes you see companies that do compliance-based approaches, just enough to fulfill the legal requirements or the requirements of stakeholders such as investors. But here you see a strategy behind it and an execution of a strategy. So thanks for kicking this off with an excellent example. In the interest of time, I will move to our next speaker, Matthew Rajendra. I came across Matthew some years ago at a green tech event, and last year I was the chief judge of the Malaysian ICT Awards, and he was our winner and went on to win many other awards. Matthew, please share with us your green tech innovation case study. I asked him to really share with us the details of where he is, so we can look at what challenges innovation technologies are facing in the real world. The floor is yours, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthias. Is everyone, am I coming in loud and clear? Excellent, good stuff. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity for me to share my journey into green technology innovation and the subsequent commercialization efforts. What I've got to share today are some lessons learned, which I believe is very, very applicable to green technology industry ecosystem as a whole. So let's get started. The first lesson that we learned was that, for green technology innovation, precisely this technology or this industry, when you want to innovate and when you want to commercialize green technology, you require something called moonshot thinking, which means shooting for the moon. Bold ideas that will make significant global disruptive impact. That's the only way to go when you're talking about green technology. So let me explain what moonshot thinking is all about. Instead of just a 10% gain, a moonshot aims for a 10 times improvement over what currently exists. So if you do your maths, 10 times improvement translates to 1,000% improvement. Don't go for a 10% improvement, strive for 1,000% improvement. So moonshot thinking, if you were to break it down into its elements, is you're presented with a huge problem, and I'll tell you something, the world's greatest problems are your biggest business opportunities. With a huge problem, you then come up with a radical solution, totally out of the box, something that no one would expect. And you couple that with exponential technology. So what is the opposite of exponential? Linear. If I were to take 30 linear steps forward, I would be 30 meters down the road. But if I were to take 30 exponential steps forward, I'm going to be 1 billion meters ahead in the road. So you need to look at exponential technology. Putting all three together, you've got moonshot thinking. So as I said, when you only work to make things 10% better, you're going to take the obvious part that everyone else is on. And making your 10% improvement using the same assumptions, the same processes, and tactics that everyone is using, you're just trying to get ahead by about 10%. It's not going to work. And the other lesson that we've learned, it is, surprisingly, it is often much easier to make something 1,000% better than it is to make something 10% better. Yeah, that's a surprising thing that we've learned in this journey in the past 5 years. So you start with throwing out your existing assumptions. Don't make assumptions, throw it out, get down to the meat, get down to the actual core, fundamental truth, the physics behind something, if you're a scientist. And from there, once you stripped everything bare, you reason up from there. I'll give you some example. Submersify, take the plunge, that's our slogan. This will make sense when I show you our technology. So first things first, moonshot thinking, remember? Huge problem. So you need a huge problem, first of all. Tackle the world's biggest problems. Data centers. You all rely on data centers. Every time you do Waze, you do Uber, you go to Google, you go to Facebook, your data resides in data centers. We all need data centers. It's going to grow. The industry is going to grow by leaps and bounds. Your kids are going to rely on data centers, and there are going to be thousands of data centers to be built in the coming years. But you know what? The data center industry faces many challenges. They include financial, technical, and environmental issues. It takes a lot of money to build a data center, which is typically a building, and you've got thousands of servers within the building itself. And once you've built this expensive data center, you then need to operate the data center, and you've got to cough out huge amounts of money every month just on the OPEX, which is energy bills at the end of the day. You need a lot of space, and it takes a long time to build as well. And if your cooling fails in a data center, you've only got 8 minutes to respond. Otherwise, bye-bye servers, and you get all these millions of people who will not be able to access your services. Only 8 minutes in a cooling failure. And there's a high failure rate for servers. There's lots of dust, and it's very noisy in a data center as well. But on an environmental front, you'll find that data center industries are in the top 10 industries that contribute the most to global greenhouse gases. To be precise, just the data center industry contributes 3.3% of CO2 emissions last year. 3.3% of the world's CO2 emissions. They take up huge amounts of energy. If the data center industry was a country, it will be country number 5 with the biggest carbon footprint in the world. So we need a radical solution. Remember, moonshot thinking? What have we done? We stripped everything bare down naked, and we found that air was the problem. Air was creating huge problems for data center because it was pretty much a poor heat conductor. So what we've did is we created a coolant, and we've taken pretty much IT equipment, whether it's routers, switches, and so on, and we fully submerged them into our coolant, taking air out of the equation. And this translates to a variety of value propositions, which makes it very, very interesting. You get a zero capex upfront, so people are wondering, hey, hold on, you have got to come up with money somewhere. I'll tell you what we did with that. We've reduced energy consumptions by 50%, carbon footprint by 50%, and a host of other technical benefits as well. So the current industry fact is that for every watt of electricity that goes into a server, 1 watt comes out as heat, and you need 1 watt of cooling to pretty much cool that 1 watt of heat that's coming out. What we've done is we've rewritten the formula. Right now, 0.85 watts are going in. Yes, we've reduced the energy consumption of the server by removing the fans. You don't need fans in a submerged environment. Fans are to draw in air and to exhaust air. So we've removed the fans, and that translated to savings on the IT equipment. And we only need 0.04 watts to cool right now, as opposed to 1 watt. Now, that is exponential technology, pretty much. Our coolant is 1,300 times more efficient than air. So take any routers, switches, firewalls, all this equipment, and you'll find that if you're in the IT industry, racks are typically 6 feet tall, standing vertical, and you put in your servers this way. Our racks are on its floor, on its back, filled up with coolant, and we put in our servers this way. The heat transfers to the coolant, which is totally dielectric. During lunch, come look for me. We've got a demo of my little coolant. No IT equipment, but I'll show you some pretty cool stuff with our coolant as well. And you'll find that then we just have to use electricity for a pump, to a heat exchanger, and a choice of a very cheap cooling, for example, radiators and so on. And so in 2010, we first came up with the idea, the concept of this technology. And I like to use a barometer called the skepticism meter. You know, out of 10 people, how many people are skeptics of the technology? When it comes to green technology, face it, everyone is a skeptic. So if you notice, when we first came up with the idea, 100% skepticism. We proceeded in 2011 to come up with a prototype of the environment, and still it was 100% skeptic. We need to show pretty much a server being submerged and it working. So what we did in 2012 is that we came up with a proof of concept. So we've already had the coolant running since 2010, and this was a smaller version of our normal 6-feet environment. It was just a little 2-feet rack. And slowly you notice that the skepticism meter started decreasing. We ran a pilot test in 2013, and it came down to 8 people out of 10 were skeptics. And then we had an expanded pilot test, 60%. Okay, not too bad. In 2015, something happened. Last year, something happened. You'll notice that there's a huge difference in our skepticism meter. It came all the way down to 30%. So what happened in 2015? And that is the key takeaway points that I would like to make in this presentation. And that is, you need to close your customers. You need your customers. You need to show people a working site. So we closed 2 customers. We obtained hardware manufacturing warranty. So before this, if you were to take a HP server and submerge it in, HP will say, hey, hold on. I didn't design this server for your environment. Voided warranty. But now, once HP tested our technology, they've extended it. And right now, we've got Brocade, Palo Alto Networks, and a range of other companies that are currently testing, like Cisco, F5, Fujitsu, and so on. We went on to win 5 international awards. The Olympics of the ICT industry was in Brasilia this year. United Nations gave us an award for our environmental efforts for the technology. And as what Matthias is saying, we also won a couple of other awards on the Asia levels. So in 2016, how did we get zero capex? We embarked on a program called EPC, Energy Performance Contracting. So do some research. It's pretty cool. It allows your customers to come in at zero capex. If you're a dog food manufacturer, it would well suit you to demonstrate you eating the dog food. And that's what we do. So we implement our technology for free at data centers, and we get our money back on the savings, because we are promising major savings here. So that savings, instead of paying it to your utility company, you're actually paying it to us. And in 2017, next year, we've got a spin-off company. I'm just going to finish, Matthias, my last slide, is Space Arc. So we want now 100% free energy for a data center. And you know what? In geosynchronous orbit within the world itself, within the globe itself, you get free electricity because you've got the full performance of the solar energy. But very importantly is that data centers are faced with government jurisdiction. If I were to build a data center in Malaysia, pretty much the Malaysian government is able to walk in and retrieve that data. They don't like it. But guess what? In geosynchronous orbit, there's no governmental jurisdiction, so you store your data without governmental interference. That's what we are going for as well. And guess what? We're back to square one. Go figure. Skepticism at 100% right now, right? A data center in space. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. When I first heard the idea of dipping your server into some kind of a liquid, I thought, wow, boom, all the sparks are going to fly, and the thing is going to be finished. But we will have a little lunchtime demo. The idea is really to look at, you know, from this space where you are now, verification and very few, but already some customers, how can we move it into mainstream to grab the opportunity of so much CO2 emission reduction and dissemination of green technology. Now I have the pleasure of inviting our other panelists onto the stage to engage in a lively conversation, and later on for you guys to ask your questions. You can use the well-known pigeonhole to start putting in your questions, and we will select later on those that have the biggest response, or that seem to be the most relevant. So can I ask the already well-known Priyanta Vijayantaga, the Principal Energy Specialist and famous for his leadership in the ASEF event that happens once a year here at the ADB. Welcome, Priyanta. Then we have, next one up is Chris Tila Kasri, Dharma Kirti, the Executive Director, Strategic Enterprise Management Agency from Sri Lanka. He has just returned from Marrakesh from the COP meeting. Then we have David Sundal, Senior Research Fellow from the Clayton Christian Institute of Disruptive Innovation. He has been working on some papers and some research on exactly this subject. We want to benefit from his expertise. And then last but not least, we have Anthony Hallock, the faculty member, Industrial Environmental Management from the University of Queensland. So we have two academics here giving us all their expertise, and he is really focused as well on the circular economy. What can we learn from the circular economy? So let me kick off our discussion here with Priyanta. I think, Priyanta, with your comprehensive expertise through your ADB work, through ASEF, on seeing an industry sector go from niche to mainstream, the renewable energy sector, we heard that in Tata's presentation. My first question for you is, what can we learn from the success of the renewable sector, which has moved from niche to mainstream, for other environmental business innovations?
Thank you very much, Matthias. It's great to be here and talking about green business, of course, to see how we can find analogies from the renewable energy sector to green business. To start off with, actually, as Matthias himself indicated, and then yesterday Mr. Solheim talked about, it is basically the first and foremost thing is the demand. Whatever you do, if there is demand, there is always it is always the catalyst to get things moving. So you have to have the demand. If you take the renewable energy sector, early stages, renewable energy sector was developed mainly in the off-grid systems, off-grid areas. If you take some of the examples like small hydro systems, solar, small wind systems, all these came in the off-grid areas simply because of the demand. They needed energy services. There was no other way to supply them but to use these decentralized systems. Naturally, these renewable energy sources were available in those rural areas, and the obvious way to go forward was to develop these renewable energy systems. In fact, if I take an example, as far back as in early 20th century in Sri Lanka, if you look at these rich fellows, tea gardens, all these investors in the tea gardens, they had about over 500 micro-hydro systems scattered all over tea estates in Sri Lanka, simply because that was what was demanded. It was a requirement. So that's the first and foremost thing when it comes to doing any business. So that's the biggest lesson which you can learn. And the other, of course, along with it, if you look at, along with it, the business will grow. When the demand is there, the businesses will grow. If you look at small hydro sector, whether it's in Nepal or in Sri Lanka, you see local entrepreneurs being able to start manufacturing small microturbines, and the electricians becoming trained in electricity, working on panels and repairing them, and so on and so forth. So the businesses will grow. Then the businesses and the demand will again drive the whole sector. And then comes the political commitments. Now, you really need the political commitments if something to become available across the country or across the region or across the world. Of course, the political commitment comes along with their vote base. When it is demanded by the people, when the voters demand it, naturally they have to listen to it. One good example is, in fact, so as a result, naturally the policies and regulations will have to be changed. One good example is when I was, back in Sri Lanka, I can still remember in the Sri Lanka Electricity Act, wheeling of power is not allowed, which means if there is a green business, if it wants to provide its own supply through green, sources, it has to, generate it on site. It cannot buy it from anywhere else because you can't transfer it through the grid because the Act does not allow that. Then one of these biggest garment manufacturers with an export market, naturally, who can pick up a premium on their clothing in Europe and in North America, wanted to do green business. And they approached me as regulator and said, what can we do? Then I was forced to look at what to do within the existing legal framework. And of course, I sat with my lawyers and with the Attorney General's Department, and finally we managed to come up with something which can be done within the existing Electricity Act, and then of course they came up with this green business. So political commitments come along with all this, and that's required, and that comes with the pressure from the demand and of course from the industry. I'll stop there.
Excellent insight. Thanks so much. The other question I would like to ask you, Priyanta, in terms of the ADB, what role has the ADB played in this arena, and how can the ADB play a role in the wider green business growth?
If you take the example again from the energy sector, we have been involved with with all these different sections in the renewable energy industry. Starting from policy making, supporting the governments to make policies and regulations, then and also the most important thing which I forgot to mention is the awareness. I mean, you may need something, or the rural communities demanded electricity services, but of course they did not know what technology should be used. So which means we have the responsibility to bring these communities in, the right kind of technology, particularly leapfrogging when it comes to technologies, not to go through the same path what everybody else went through in the past. And so awareness building. Now that's a responsibility we have. We have been doing quite a lot. At the same time, as our previous speaker said, you have always risks associated with new technologies. So bringing down the risk of investment is very important. So that's where ADB has been coming in quite a lot in basically reducing the risks. Probably in pilot projects, we have been doing a lot of pilot projects on various new technologies, new business models. We have been investing in one example is in India, for instance, Simpa project where mobile technology and solar power combine to provide electricity services on a lease basis to the rural communities. That's a very nice business model where we invested in, ADB invested in it. Naturally, with our investments coming in, the risks go down, therefore the cost of financing will go down. That's something which we always do. And then the political commitments. We, as you know very well, we lend money to these governments. So we have the carrot. So at the same time, we can use our stick along with it. So we try to bring these governments encourage these governments to come up with the right kind of policies and regulations while we invest in some of these technologies. So these are some of the things that we have been doing, and we can use more or less the same things to do other types of green businesses also, not just renewable energy. These are just lessons from the sector.
Excellent. I think that's a great news to hear. The ADB is here to help and support. We might get back to that later on in the questions. Maybe we will even have pigeonhole questions on that. Thanks so much, Priyanta. Now, Chris, you have been involved in venture capital investment. You still have a role with Green Equator Capital and previously Intel Capital. What kind of green innovation technology have you been involved in investing, and why?
Okay, first and foremost, I want to thank ADB for having me here today. And thank you, nice panel, set of panelists we have. In answering that question, I want to first say that as a Green Equator Venture Capital, we changed the model of the venture capital fund management itself. Because before, I mean, there are plenty of opportunities to invest in all kinds of spaces. But what we need is we need to build an ecosystem of investee companies and green entrepreneurs. And what we find is that the millennials are the ones who are sort of coming up with ideas, and some of the older generation, our generation and above, they have ideas that are still stuck in the fossil fuel adaptation business models that they come up with. So the millennials are coming up with innovative models. And also the ethos of those millennials in the way that they're approaching businesses and the values that they're putting into the businesses is not necessarily always looking at a massive multiplier of 10x, 12x. That's not what they're looking for. It's the impact that they're making with the business. So as a venture capital fund, when I had to raise the fund initially with the group, we had to stay away from the traditional pension funds and the types of investors who put money into venture capital funds who are looking for exits in 5 years, 7 years time frame. So I think the point I want to make here, because partly financing is critically important, is that we needed to seed a fund that would actually create a new ethos amongst the millennials who are the entrepreneurs. So the sectors that they have come up with, which is very, very interesting, obviously they can't get away from renewables, and they're looking at leapfrog technologies. So our fund is focused on Sri Lanka-centric, Sri Lanka resource-based opportunities. So one is being thorium, and there's a couple of think tanks in Sri Lanka and development ideas that have come up with these saltwater reactor design that the US has developed, which Sri Lanka has thorium because we have monazite. Second one is with the graphite, with the graphene on the battery storage sector, and that's an interesting exercise. But what has been most exciting for us is being in the agriculture sector, in the agrotech. In the agrotech, we found that there was 2 software companies that has developed a model to basically identify farmers who are planting, looking at the planting cycle, the harvesting. So they're reducing the post-harvest losses by linking directly buyers through the internet to the harvesting date. So people pre-buy, pre-order the harvest from the farmers. And what that particular model has done is basically the farmers themselves know who else is planting what, so there's no excess surplus of products. So then also on the transport side, the government has been supportive, is to convert the tuk-tuks into electrics. And that's a big model because we had 500,000 tuk-tuks in Colombo, and that's a big problem. And converting them with kits and empowering that's been another little sector that we have put in some money.
Excellent. Thanks for your sharing, Chris. It reminds me, we have the ADB Youth here. They have done a contest for solutions to solve our key environmental problems. We have 3 of the winners here in the exhibition booths in similar sectors. I want to encourage you to visit all the exhibition booths. And tomorrow morning, the ADB Youth is running the plenary, so we will get some interesting feedback from them there. You're right, the millennials, they are kind of quite innovative and flexible, and maybe as well going for the moonshine or moonrise goals as moonshot, as Matthew pointed it out. Now, you've just come back from Marrakesh. What were the main trends there in relation to green business, and what are the sectors that you see gonna see major growth in the next few years in the green business arena?
Well, sadly, there wasn't real commitment of additional money in Marrakesh this time. I mean, Germany stepped up and gave $80 million for the adaptation fund, which is kind of a fund that brings in smaller parcel investments. But what I was more excited than, because Marrakesh was more about, I think, with the post-US election issue, was to reaffirm the global commitment, really, and to operationalize the commitment that was made in COP21. So it was not so much on the financing side. But what was exciting was pre-Marrakesh, the Montreal Protocol meeting, where the HFC phasing out agreement came into force. Now, that's where the opportunity, again, for a VC that I see, because urban heating, refrigerants, and cooling is the biggest issue. And clearly, the global output of refrigerators and air conditioners that are contributing to greenhouse gases, the HFC phasing out, has a huge opportunity for people to retrofit the existing air conditioners. And so we are not looking at really exciting, sexy technologies here, right? We're looking at, if you're really committed to the green space, right? If you're a responsible green VC, you cannot always be looking for the billion-dollar Facebook type of valuation. You need to look at what actually would deliver results on the ground. So we are sectorally looking at that. So Marrakesh, to me, demonstrated very clearly the commitment that the world community had for it, but the financing for it is, I think, the Norwegian sovereign fund has made a substantial commitment of money, and I think it's the bilateral funding and the sovereign funds that will probably give more money. The Clean Energy Fund coming out of Korea, which is 100 billion from 2020. Well, let's see how those commitments of those monies come in. But raising money in the venture capital world, I mean, there were a VC configuration. There was $128 billion in VC monies that were invested globally. But out of that, only about $4 billion came in for agri-tech and less than $1 billion for other green investments. So it's not really sexy right now because Silicon Valley has kind of dialed down some of the monies that are coming into this sector.
Great, thanks. Agri-tech, we have a track tomorrow morning as well that covers some of that. You mentioned the ICT sector. We will cover that in the second track on Thursday morning. So those are some of the major trends happening. Great to hear there was encouraging news on the Montreal Protocol. I still remember the shock I got when I first moved to Malaysia and the aircon guy came in and he had this little bottle of R22. I think 3,000 times higher carbon footprint than CO2. Wow, I got a shock of my life. But those are the realities on the ground, and that's a big business opportunity to actually move on from that. Okay, great. David, all the way from the US, thanks so much for coming. You've done some research on what business models have actually worked in terms of disruptive innovation. Can you share with us your main results, and what would you recommend to Matthew for the Submersify to take it to the next level?
Oh, okay. Well, that's that's a great challenge. Let me just back up a little bit and say that disruptive innovation, disruptive technology is a very commonly used term and actually widely misunderstood. There are two kinds that we break the world up into two kinds of technologies or two kinds of processes or business models. Ones that are sustaining, and they sustain an existing institution in the way that it knows how to make money. Disruptive innovations take root in markets that look to traditional market, sort of market researchers, to the people who are in finance. It looks unattractive, or it actually tries to deliver something to people who just don't have a chance to consume that. So the example I'm using actually is one that the ADB helped us or taught us about, which was the solar home system initiative in Bangladesh. Turns out that 75% of Bangladeshis live in what we consider a rural area, which means you can't just go in and build infrastructure to send power out to them. So what they did is they invested in this IDCOL, which was about the infrastructure, but what they did is they built little, very small solar panels that it was a 20-watt system, and they made financing available to people in these rural areas so that they could actually use it. Now I want to back up one step and say, okay, so that's great. We're getting power, we're getting electricity to people who haven't had electricity in the past. The thing is that those people in those homes and in those villages don't wake up every day wondering, how can I make the world greener? In fact, probably out of the 7+ billion people on the earth, they're really worried more about, how do I, make a good living for my family? How do I take care of my kids? How do I, do, various other things? And what this initiative allowed was, so initially, a 20-watt system. This is the equivalent of running an LED lamp for 4 to 5 hours, plus charging your mobile phone for 4 to 5 hours. And they were so happy to have this, not because they needed electricity, but because they could work late, they could keep their businesses open later in the afternoons and evenings. And in households, they could keep the lights on longer so that their kids could study, get better results, and get ahead in life. That's how we think of things. One of the ways that we talk about this is that nobody really ever went out to buy a particular piece of technology. The old way we say this is nobody ever wanted to buy a 1/4-inch drill bit. What they needed was a 1/4-inch hole. And often what we find is that when we talk to people, they're very focused on the technology and improving the technology and getting the technology better. But what we have discovered is that if you look carefully and you build the right kind of business model, many technologies which are not good enough for mainstream applications actually will be well received by many, many people. They either have a terrible bunch of workarounds or they have literally nothing for them. And so to have some opportunity actually is a really wonderful thing. So our focus then is on profitable business models, so they're profitable by attracting either people who never consumed this this sort of thing, or people who are overserved by current offerings. So they're, in fact, the least attractive customers or non-customers at all. And it's really not about the technology. It's about building a business model by matching a need, and not just the straightforward practical need. I'll give you one other example. If you're familiar with Chotocool, there are these small refrigeration units. They've sold quite well in rural India. They're rechargeable. They're about the size of one of these speakers. Now, when they sold them, it solved the immediate problem of keeping produce and things, perishables, fresh longer. But what they also discovered is that people were hiding these back in the back parts of their homes. And so they tried to figure out why they were doing this. Well, it turns out the Chotocool represented, when your family came over, your neighbors came over, if you had a Chotocool in the kitchen, that meant that you were poor because you couldn't afford a real refrigerator. So Chotocool then went back to the drawing board. They didn't really change any of the specs, but if you look at their website now, it is all about it's all about the cool aspect of it. Because when someone brings a product or service into their lives, so whether it's a solar panel in Bangladesh or a small battery-powered rechargeable refrigeration unit in rural India, what you have to be able to do is help them to solve a practical problem that has social and emotional dimensions to it. Often we look at the technology and all of the practical implications, but it turns out that the social and emotional implications are more often than not the gating factor in whether a technology is successfully diffused.
Great stuff, David. Maybe some quick advice for Matthew. How can he apply that to his, but keep it short, please.
Yeah, I will, absolutely. Really short, because I don't know enough to, what I tell you, our theories say. So, we work really hard to think carefully about the causal theories. First, don't try to take a fortified hill. So find customers and partners that nobody else is interested in. Second, find out beyond the sort of practical, again, just as I was saying, there are reasons that people they're hiring your innovations to do a particular job for them. And if you can understand what's behind that, then you can actually, you actually can scale quite quickly. And so, so look for customers other people don't want, or look at a place where people haven't even had this opportunity. Don't look at it as directly, oh, now you have a data center. Think about what a data center might mean to that place, other than just, oh, now we have a way to crunch a lot more data, right? So it could be there are more jobs, it could be a whole variety of things. So sort of looking a layer deeper to why people draw things into their lives. And again, find customers that no one else is interested in.
That's what we had to do as well with our green building materials. The guys that had big problems that nobody else wanted to touch were kind of our first customers. And the guys that had low quality technology and knew they needed to innovate to a higher. Other than that, we thought people would buy immediately because we have the greatest technology, but nobody was buying. And bigger guys only get interested in you if you start taking customers away from them. If you're a small fish, nobody is interested. But I've seen Matthew has already spiced up his branding. I think that comes as well in with what you shared about make it more attractive, make it more sexy, so they don't have to hide the refrigerator and be seen as poor, but they're doing something that is better and more branded.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Because again, it's looking really deeply into the social, emotional aspects of why people draw. We can solve lots of practical problems, but the barriers to those problems tend to be social and individually emotional. And if you can look through those lenses, you actually have a much higher rate of success, which there's lots and lots of examples, but my time is up.
Yeah, great. Anthony, all the way from the University of Queensland. You are the guru on the circular economy. What can we learn from those experiences in terms of getting from niche to mainstream?
Okay. Firstly, thanks for inviting me to come here in ADB, and it's good to be back in the Philippines, actually. Circular economy, in a nutshell, means that we need to maximize the sustainable use of resources, whether it's water, energy, and minerals. Secondly, we have to reduce our emissions to air, water, to land, as well as waste. And the core essence of circular economy is really finding value out of waste. So I'm here in the Philippines actually to advance the idea of circular economy starting in Mindanao. So I've been working in the agri-food sector in Mindanao. Particularly, we have to analyze the whole supply chain because there are a lot of waste at every stage of the supply chain. And based on my experience in Australia, where we are trying to advance what we call Advanced Queensland, where we try to analyze the whole supply chain of the agri-food sector such that we can identify value-adding products such as biochemicals, bioplastics, bioenergy, and biofuels. And I think that is very applicable in the Asian region because there are a lot of waste in the Asian region and we have a lot of biomass here. And I think we have a competitive edge actually in comparison to other countries. And as we also know, based from what I heard, I think in the last, yesterday actually, where there is 1/3 of the food waste, and according to some research actually, that most of this waste in the developing countries happen after the post-harvest, while in the developed countries happen in the consumption side. So therefore, we have to think here in the developing countries, specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, on how can we innovate actually to create new biomass-based products because we have a lot of potential here. And circular economy is a great philosophy, or in conjunction with the green philosophy, actually, the green economy philosophy. So therefore, in accordance with circular economy, we need to think in systems rather than in what we call quick fix technological solutions, because according to some research, it is not enough. As what David said, we need to talk about social, emotional, ecological context. So if there is any emerging technologies nowadays, we need to embed this into social, economic, ecological context, such that we can analyze its large-scale impact, whether it's social, economic, and environmental impact. So there are a lot of innovative, transformative ideas that we can actually implement if we actually pursue the philosophy of green or circular economy. And hopefully that will answer the first question.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anthony. Social, emotional, ecological context. That sounds a handful, but I think that's why I bought this bag, because I was socially, environmentally, and emotionally touched that this has been produced by people who have suffered from the typhoon with the waste that was left over after the help goods arrived. So I think this emotional connectivity with the consumer, and often green businesses say, hey, I don't have enough customers, I'm not making money. I think that came across here as well. Priyanta, you know, when you mentioned the demand going up, this can either be because there's a problem, there's a need, or the consumers change their behavior because we catch them emotionally, environmentally, and socially with something that they really get excited about. Let's kick off our questions from the audience. We have loads of exciting stuff there from the pigeonhole. Let's start off with the one that has 10 votes. How can you make green business practices such as upcycling as an industrial standard rather than a mere CSR stance for businesses in the Asia Pacific at large? I guess this points out the problem. A lot of things only happen as long as CSR money is there, and then once that CSR initiative is gone, it stops. How can we make it an industrial standard or maybe a business case? Maybe Alka, any comments on that? I mean, you guys have done a lot of internal recycling and upcycling. What has triggered it that it became a practice?
Yeah, so what Anthony mentioned, you have to connect it with business drivers. I am not talking of CSR at all. You have to show that by upcycling or recycling or reuse, you are minimizing the use of virgin raw material. You have to show that business connect. I come from proper core function, so I understand that for a business manager with a given budget, taking chances with innovation and all will be tough. So you have to show the connect between the upcycling, recycling, reuse, minimization of financial leakages henceforth, and this will fly. So this is how we have attempted to do, and I have reason to believe this will, if it has worked for us, it will work for others. So connect it with cost reduction or resource productivity or resource efficiency. Nowhere we are talking about CS. CSR is a good seed money. It's not there for long. You know, it can't sustain for long.
I guess maybe this is something that I have seen as well when I came to Asia. Corporate foundations and big companies in Asia often have the CSR branch that helps socially, environmentally. Things like this here, like my pencil case, this didn't come from a foundation here. This is one of those typical Tetra packs, and then it's been upcycled into a pencil case. Very simple, lovely thing. It could be turned into a business, but so far nobody has turned it into a business. Maybe if one of you wants to do it, feel free. But I think this is a critical thing. Make it have a business case. Somebody needs to earn money from it. Otherwise, it will be only a short-term initiative. That's right. Anthony, you have another point on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important that if we go for upcycling, actually, we need to pursue this in the context of circular economy. Again, we have heard about these 3 R's, no? This reuse, recycle. And if we can think about, if we do recycling, think about what value that we can create out of this. Whether when we recycle something, when we find some value out of these recycled products, we have to think about this, because in the context, really to advance actually in mainstreaming actually this one, we need to think in systems actually, as Albert Einstein mentioned, that we cannot solve the problem at the level we created the problem. So therefore, if we really want to address the issue that is being pointed forward rather in the UN SDG goals, which are all interconnected actually, as well as in the UK, Marrakesh actually, the UNEP COP 22, we need to understand that we have to put forward a systemic approach to the problem rather than a quick fix, technological, a band-aid, a silo approach. It won't work, because technological by itself won't solve the issue of sustainable development.
Thank you. The next question with 10 votes. Most case studies we see, oops, one just jumped up there, but let me go for that one that I picked out, and then we'll go for the 11 votes one, which just climbed up in the ladder of priority. Most case studies we see are of 10% improvement type, which just means causing a little less harm, hardly any moonshot type. How do we mainstream moonshot thinking among business leaders for going green? I think, Matthew, that's maybe a good question for you, but not from your own company's perspective, but from, the big players out there. We see some of it happening in Tata as already, but we want to see it happen as a general business principle. What's your advice on how to convince the big boys that they should do moonshot thinking?
It's all about value proposition. At the end of the day, it's all about making financial sense first. Because when I first started with going green 8 years ago, I was barking up the wrong tree. I was going for presentation after presentation, and people were, I think I was just having this conversation this morning with that lady over there. And, everyone was just entertaining me when I talked about the environment and the impact that we were having, the ICT industry was having on the environment. And everyone was playing nice, and, at the end of the presentation, they said, Matt, that's amazing. Thank you for all your sharing. All right, Matt, thank you. Nice meeting you. See you. Bye. And that was the last I heard from them. It took me 1 year of doing this until I went into these meetings, and the first point I pointed out was, seriously, may not be politically correct, but I said, save money first. Everyone started listening. Then came the environment as a natural consequence of that. Now, on a personal basis, how do you go into moonshot thinking or bold ideas? It comes from the inside of leaders itself. For me, it was a personal thing. 8 years ago, I survived a plane crash. I was piloting a plane, and I almost died in that crash. I promised my daughter, who was at that time 4 years old, that because you watched this Al Gore movie, now I remember, Inconvenient Truth, something that you should watch with your kids. And and she was in tears at 4 years old after watching that movie. And I promised her, look, I'll do all I can to make sure we do something positive for the environment. So it's coming from an innate thing. I think leaders will need to develop this. I'm not sure how.
Great point. I think, yeah, Alka?
I'll just mention a couple of things over here. It's not wrong to have 10% improvement year on year. So it's a mix of both, 10% improvement year on year and some disruptive innovation, both which are required. Don't exclude this. This is equally important. And for disruptive, innovation or R&D, you have to create that conditions. If you have a R&D, if you are having some kitty earmarked for R&D innovation cell, don't measure those guys in the same yardstick in which you are measuring your operational heads. Create that culture, and that will bring in moonshot technology. And that's precisely what is happening. We are attempting. Let me not paint a rosy picture. We are attempting that. We have a group technology office which is working in 4 areas: nanoparticles, graphene, and all, which is the next material. We are working on wearables, smart wearables, which talks about health of the employees, wearables and wearables. We're talking about digital, which is going into smart factory and fleets. So we pick up themes which are meeting the needs, but we are also giving nurturing time. Don't evaluate them on the same yardstick assessment time which you do for other functions. Give them some time.
David?
I was just going to say, amen, right? I mean, that actually turns out to be an incredibly important part of any large venture. The tendency is, if you want to start something new and say it's going to be a moonshot, it gets measured on the same basis. It competes for money with other projects inside a firm in a way that's unfair, because these things are early, they're nascent, and they need to be treated as such. At our institute, we've begun to try to think about how do we help business leaders think about their organizations, especially large or scale organizations, less from a sort of P&L stand. They got to do the P&L, but also to think that from a sort of developmental framework. Some things are at an early stage, some things are at in a mid stage, and some things are at a late stage, and that's just the way it should be. But we don't manage our early stage stuff the way we manage our middle or late stage stuff, which that point is, it is really, we have observed in every company the difference between success or failure in really forward thinking.
I kind of think as well, some of the 10% is the very much operational stuff where you deal with, the facilities managers, and it's much more about technology, but some of it can be harvested by motivating people, where you need communication, which often doesn't happen. But the moonshot is the strategy. Where's the business going, in the medium to long term? I want to quickly ask Chris, you have dealt with a lot of public sector, government kind of aspects. Can we as well apply the moonshot, the bold changes at that level, and how would we kind of be able to entice governments to take some really proactive steps?
Well, I mean, clearly, whether it's a government or private sector, I mean, it's institutional thinking, internal thinking, that where you basically empower the staff to come up with innovative solutions and ideas. And where we fall short in government is basically, it's not a culture like in the private sector, where it encourages innovative thinking. It's about trying to second guess what your boss is trying to do, right? So, and it's playing safe. So, I mean, I take example in Sri Lanka, for example, where I've worked in the public service. The moonshot type of thinking that we have now seen is that the government found that the climate change is literally impacting on the fertilizers, the agrochemicals that is completely destroying the soil. So the government took away the fertilizer subsidy that was given for chemical fertilizers and gave that fertilizer subsidy directly to organic farmers. Right? So the organic farmers then takes that fertilizer subsidy to basically rebuild their soils. And that was a substantial financial contribution. And that was a moonshot thinking, right? And then banned glyphosates at the same time, right? So basically, it was a tandem move. And there are 500,000 paddy farmers. And now the government has initiated a program under our institution where 50,000 farmers are now gone organic. And the government is going in for the entire country going organic. So that commitment and taking away subsidy, that was the kind of thing the government could do, a moonshot thinking. Another moonshot thinking the government did 30 years ago was for the apparel industry. This is the biggest export for Sri Lanka, the apparels. And what they did was they basically allocated quotas to rural towns so that the entrepreneurs had to take their business and set it up in rural towns so there was job creation at the rural level, right? So now you have green factories, literally, coming up because of Gap and some of the major brands that are with green values that are selling green values directly to these rural young girls who are working in these factories, right? So they are more empowered and they are more conscious about recycling, about cradle to cradle as opposed to cradle to grave thinking, and all of that has come through, and then LEED standards factory buildings are coming up in these rural areas. So that was moonshot thinking at the time of actually allocating export quotas to rural towns, and over time we have seen the benefit of that.
Great, excellent examples there from Sri Lanka of really taking bold steps and then getting the rewards, getting the returns for the people, for the local community, for the green jobs. Priyanta, earlier on when we were discussing and you were sharing what the ADB can do, I was wondering maybe there are some green innovation businesses here, if they would want to figure out how can they get involved with what the ADB is doing, what would the best step for them to take? Do they knock on somebody's door? Do they write an email to someone?
As a first step, probably wherever you are, you can always contact our resident mission. Our resident mission is the first point of contact in almost most of the countries have our resident missions. So we always have people, focal points for different subsectors, whether it's agriculture or energy or transport, we have people. And that's the first, point of contact. And through them, they can either learn directly from them or through them from headquarters what we are doing in terms of various interventions in green businesses. Actually, we ourselves, where I work now, what is called Energy Sector Advisory Group, we run a few technical assistance programs. One important one is actually on clean tech. We are supporting, emerging clean technologies to take these technologies to, commercial scale to some of the countries. And we act as interface between these technology providers and the users of it. So we do a lot of work, at headquarters through various technical assistance programs. And all this information can come directly from us or through our resident missions.
Great, excellent advice. You will see as well a lot of the ADB technical experts or sector experts on stage here in the next 2 days still. Tomorrow morning we have the waste expert, then we have the agriculture expert chairing a session. So there's loads of networking opportunities for you guys here. Let's go back to the questions there. The 11 votes question there, what is needed to educate the market that green products can be lower cost price than generics? Now, the question in itself, we could question whether it's correct, right? Because usually when you start small volume production of green products, the price is higher. Organics here in Asia is 50 to 100% higher. In Germany, it's 10 to 20% higher because of the scale. The more people buy green products, the lower the prices become. Green procurement is an important issue. What are your views on this issue of, is green more expensive? Is it cheaper? Maybe we need to apply the systems thinking here, as Anthony has alluded to. Maybe one or two of you can quickly share your views on that. How can we get green products down in price to scale things up? short, sharp answer.
Okay. Yeah, as you have alluded, it is, no, it depends on the demand, actually. So, but if we're going to look at that in, you know, I am a system thinker and analyst, and we usually create models, actually. And let's say if there is a need to produce green products or generic products, we usually create models, right? We usually take into account economic indicators, environmental indicators, social indicators. So we use a tool, what we call systems analysis and modeling, and hopefully this is being taught in business schools, actually, because I've heard this in the United States, in the UK. So what we do is that, given that there is a low demand first, and there is a corresponding price on that, we perform what we call what-if analysis, a scenario analysis, as you would say. And we would be able to estimate that if this is the demand, this is the corresponding price. So we do all these analysis ahead. Let's say if we're going to introduce a new product in the market, what we do is we do a large-scale sustainability analysis, considering the triple dimensions of sustainability. And once we have consider maybe the 2 or 4 best scenarios, then we would be able to talk about maybe to the suppliers, to the manufacturers, that it is about time maybe to mass produce the product. Again, we have to do first all of this via computational analysis, via ICT, or with the support of cyber computing. So we do all this large-scale analysis, and hopefully we can determine what should be the most suitable price in a particular demand.
Yes, Chris?
I guess the point is it's not about comparing things with generics, because a green product is completely, in some respects, in the category, providing benefits that's beyond what the generic has provided. So you cannot really compare it one-to-one, because a green product essentially is bringing you lots of other benefits. So the marketing of it is selling the benefits and attaching the value that people are not seeing, the intangible value of it. So I mean, that's really where it is. It's a mindset thing in appreciating the total value of a green product that's well beyond the utilitarian value of that product itself. So the externality cost that we talk about in many respects, in all kinds of things, particularly in electricity generation and so forth, it's that externality cost has to be now converted back into a benefit and explained. So from a government perspective, green products, if someone is to say, hey, take away the coal power plant and replace that with LNG, or in our case that we are funding, whether it's thorium nuclear or with this OTEC, ocean thermal energy conversion electricity or whatever, we can clearly explain that the externality cost has been reduced by these technologies, right? And then you've got to show them where they have been spending that money on those externalities elsewhere, which it's a massive saving. So it's about showing the savings of the externalities.
Actually, I kind of use the same principle, but more on a personal level. I might say, yes, green products are in a lot of cases more expensive, but I need less, and my consumption pattern has changed. Less is more. I don't have a car, my electricity bill is less than $10 US. I don't need shampoo. My daily savings are so big that my green lifestyle is much cheaper than a conventional lifestyle. So that's as well a way of looking at it from a systems perspective, that the bottom line, you can actually have more money available. I want to finish off this interesting and exciting round with just from each of you a 1 minute, your main recommendation. It might be a recommendation for the big businesses out there or the not yet so green businesses, how to do greening, or for the hardcore green technology companies, maybe still struggling to get mainstream, what is your main recommendation for them? But just a 1 minute maximum statement. Ladies first.
I'm tempted to respond to the last question, which was shown over there. But my recommendation is all the CSOs and the HSCs and the CSR professional here, try to embed whatever you're trying to drive as a part of business strategy. There should not be any sustainability strategy. There's only one strategy, that is business strategy. Get the tenets of sustainability built in that. That is the first starting point of mainstreaming this subject. Otherwise, it will always sit on the fence.
Wow, great.
Well, I guess I'm going to give it from the perspective of VC, because I'm here at ADB and I'm going to use this opportunity to say it. I think we need a fund of funds. We need an apex fund of funds to create more VCs in the green VC space. I saw this in the tech space when there was no money, there was fund of funds, and that then matching funds. So that's what's lacking. Equity funding at the startup, early stage, mezzanine finance, Series A, B, C, D sort of funding. You don't have green funds available. Pension funds are not putting money. So I would hope the ADB will take that initiative to create a apex matching fund so that you can seed more venture capital funds in the region.
Great, thanks Chris. Priyanta?
Yeah, my advice is actually, create demand. That can be done by, let's say, through pilots or tapping some of our own funds for that kind of purposes. We can do that, and we have money for that kind of exercises. Yeah.
Great, good to hear. Matthew?
Oh, well, very simply, built in low costs from the beginning. As hard as it may seem, put in a lot of effort in making sure that your operations have low overheads, low costs to manufacture as well. Secondly is have different messages or value propositions for the whole C-suite. The CEO wants to hear something, the CFO wants to hear something else, the chief technical officer wants to talk about reliability. Have value propositions for the whole C-suite.
Great.
That's incredibly, I think that's very insightful advice. And I'd say also, as you scan the horizon in terms of what should, if you're looking at what has high potential, rather than focusing on the technology, what I would recommend is focusing on where, let me say this, restate that just slightly, not focusing on how do we make the technology good enough for the mainstream, but how do we find people who will be happy with the technology as it is now? If we can match that and work on low, keep things low cost, it will actually grow and disrupt the larger things.
Great. Anthony?
All right. Regardless of the technologies, regardless of the industry, my main point is that for you business leaders and as well as those policymakers is really to learn systemic innovation, which is a requirement for mainstreaming any technology. When I say mainstreaming or pursuing systemic innovation is look on the interconnectedness of issues, particularly at the nexus of ICT, water, energy, agriculture, and finance. That's it.
Everything is interconnected. We are interconnected. Thank you so much for being with us for what I think was quite an exciting and insightful panel. Thanks to the ADB for setting it all up. I think there is a great future for green business. And please, a big applause for our wonderful panel.
Thank you very much to our panelists for an interesting panel. So now we will be entering our parallel sessions after the break. So again, please bring all of your belongings with you so that nothing gets lost. We will be rearranging this venue for our parallel sessions. Track 1A on mitigation banking will be taking place in Auditorium B. So this is the space in the middle. And the parallel track on business opportunities and natural capital will be in Auditorium C over at the far end. Okay, so see you all again at 11 a.m. sharp. Thank you.